Marcus Thompson limped across the cracked pavement of his apartment complex, the prosthetic leg making its familiar clicking sound with each step. The Afghanistan veteran had been counting quarters for laundry when the official-looking aliens appeared at his door 3 hours ago. Now he stood in the most expensive part of the city, staring up at a building that seemed to scrape the clouds themselves. "You are certain this is the correct human?" asked the tall, silver-skinned Zephyrian diplomat, his translator device making his words sound crisp and mechanical. "DNA confirms it," replied his companion, a shorter alien with 4 arms and crystalline eyes. "This is Marcus Thompson, service number 847924851, former United States Army, recipient of the Purple Heart and Bronze Star." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. His old combat fatigues were the nicest clothes he owned, and even those had seen better days. The other humans walking past wore suits that probably cost more than his monthly disability check. "Look, I think there's been some mistake. I don't know any alien kings, and I sure as hell never did anything to deserve inheriting something from one." The silver alien consulted a holographic device that materialized from his wrist. "According to our records, His Majesty King Phalixer of the Draconic Confederation specifically requested that his personal companion be given to a human warrior who understands loss, loyalty, and the weight of command. Your military record indicates multiple acts of heroism protecting your subordinates." "What kind of companion?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "A dragon," the 4-armed alien said matter-of-factly. "Though not just any dragon. This is Ember, the king's personal mount and confidant for over 3 centuries. She is ... difficult. They led him through marble corridors lined with alien art worth more than most countries." GDP, other species nodded respectfully to his escorts, Marcus recognized. Centaurians with their horse-like lower bodies, the insectoid hive delegates, and several humanoid races he couldn't identify. All of them wore expressions of barely concealed pity when they looked at him. "Why pity?" he asked. "Ember has not taken well to the king's death," the silver alien explained. "She has refused 3 previous inheritors. The first was a Centaurian general. She singed off his tail. The second was a wealthy Terran businessman. She destroyed his entire estate. The third was a Zephyrian noble. She spoke to him for 6 hours, straight about human military tactics until he begged to be relieved of the honor." "She speaks?" "Oh, yes," the 4-armed alien said with what might have been a grimace. "She speaks 17 languages fluently. Her favorite appears to be what you humans call military vernacular." They stopped before an enormous door marked with symbols that seemed to shift and dance before Marcus's eyes. Warning signs in dozens of languages covered every available surface. The most recent edition, in fresh English lettering, read, "Danger, occupant extremely hostile. Approach at your own risk. Embassy security. She's in there?" Marcus asked. "For the past month?" the silver alien confirmed. "She refuses to leave, refuses most food, and has been making what our translators describe as very creative threats against anyone who enters. The embassy is considering this a diplomatic emergency." Marcus studied the door. He'd faced worse situations in Afghanistan, clearinghouses where insurgents waited with improvised explosives, leading rescue missions into hostile territory. At least this time, nobody was shooting at him. "What happens if I can't handle her either?" The 2 aliens exchanged glances. "Then, according to draconic law, she chooses her own fate. And given her current mental state, they didn't need to finish." Marcus had seen enough soldiers struggle with loss to know where that road led. He thought of his own dark months after losing his leg and half his squad in that roadside bombing. If someone hadn't reached out to him then, if the VA counselor hadn't refused to give up on him. "All right," he said, straightening his shoulders the way he had when accepting dangerous missions. "Let's meet this dragon." The door's locking mechanism required biometric scans from both aliens, followed by what appeared to be a small prayer. When it finally opened, heat washed over them like opening an oven. The room beyond was vast, with a domed ceiling that displayed a slowly rotating view of space. Expensive furniture lay in charred ruins. Scorch marks decorated the walls in patterns that almost looked deliberate, like someone had been using fire to write messages of anger and grief. At the center of the destruction, coiled on a pile of what had once been priceless alien artifacts, lay the dragon. She was smaller than Marcus had expected, maybe 20 feet from nose to tail, but every inch radiated barely controlled power. Her scales were deep red with veins of gold running through them like molten metal. Her head, currently buried under one wing, was larger than his torso. Even in rest, small wisps of smoke curled from her nostrils. "Ember," the silver alien called softly. "We have brought another potential companion for you to meet." The dragon's head emerged from under her wing with the speed of a striking snake. Her eyes were like looking into the heart of a furnace, and when she spoke, her voice was distinctly feminine, tinged with an accent that sounded almost Southern American. "Another one?" she said, her words dripping with disdain. "Let me guess, another rich boy looking to add a pet dragon to his collection? Or maybe another general who thinks 300 years of combat experience ain't worth listening to because it comes from a beast?" Marcus found himself face to face with an intelligence that was ancient, grieving, and absolutely furious. In her eyes, he saw something he recognized from his own mirror during the worst days after his injury, the look of someone who had lost everything that mattered and was daring the world to give them a reason to care again. "Ma'am," he said, instinctively falling back on military courtesy. "I'm Sergeant Marcus Thompson, United States Army, retired. I'm sorry for your loss." The dragon's eyes widened slightly. Of all the things she might have expected, a simple expression of sympathy from a fellow soldier clearly wasn't one of them. Ember stared at Marcus for a long moment, her fiery eyes scanning him from head to toe. She noticed the way he stood, weight slightly favored on his left leg, shoulders squared despite obvious fatigue, hands loose but ready. She saw the faded ribbons on his uniform jacket and the careful way he kept his prosthetic leg positioned. "Sergeant, huh?" she said, lifting her massive head higher. "Let me guess what happened. I'd ambush? Some politician's bright idea that got your people killed while he sat safe in his office?" Marcus felt the two alien diplomats shift nervously behind him, but he kept his eyes on the dragon. "Roadside bomb outside Kandahar. Lost 2 good soldiers that day and my right leg below the knee. And now they expect you to babysit the grieving dragon because you both know what loss feels like?" Ember's voice carried a bitter laugh. "Real touching. Did they mention that my previous companions were chosen for their wealth and political connections? Not a damn one of them had ever held a weapon in anger or lost anyone who mattered. No, ma'am, they didn't mention that part." Ember uncoiled herself and rose to her full height. Even hunched in the ruined room, her head nearly touched the 15-foot ceiling. "You want to know what I told the last one? That fancy Zephyrian lord? I explained exactly how human soldiers in your Vietnam War dealt with incompetent officers. Took me 6 hours, complete with tactical diagrams." He was crying by the end. Despite everything, Marcus felt a smile tugging at his lips. "Fragging? You taught him about fragging?" "Smart boy," Ember said, genuine approval creeping into her voice. "Took him 4 hours to figure out I wasn't talking about explosive devices?" She moved closer, each step deliberate and predatory. "So here's my question, Sergeant Marcus Thompson. What makes you think you can handle me when 3 others couldn't?" Marcus looked around the destroyed room, taking in the precise pattern of the scorch marks, the way certain items had been carefully preserved while others were reduced to ash. "Because you're not just grieving. You're fighting a war." The dragon stopped moving. "Explain." "You're not randomly destroying things. You burned everything that reminded you of being treated like a pet or a trophy, but you saved items with actual meaning. That pattern on the wall isn't random anger, it's draconic script, isn't it? You're writing something." Ember's tail lashed once, but her eyes showed interest rather than rage. "What do you think I'm writing?" "A record. Maybe a memorial. Something to make sure your king isn't forgotten or reduced to just another dead alien politician." Marcus gestured to the preserved items. "These are battle honors, aren't they? Campaign medals, unit insignias from wars fought together. You're making sure someone remembers what he actually stood for. 347 years, Ember said quietly. We flew together through the Centaurian Rebellion, the Hive Wars, the Zephyrian civil conflicts. He wasn't just my king, he was my wingman, my battle partner, my closest friend. And they wanted to hand me over to some merchant prince who thought I'd look impressive in his garden. The silver alien stepped forward nervously. Your Majesty, Ember, please understand. The selection process was meant to honor— Shut it, Ember snapped, releasing a small puff of flame that made both diplomats back away. I wasn't talking to you. She turned back to Marcus. You ever lose a battle buddy, Sergeant? Yeah, Marcus said, his voice rougher than he intended. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. My team leader. Best soldier I ever served with and the closest thing to a brother I had. Took shrapnel in the neck from the same IED that got my leg. What would you do if someone tried to give you away as inheritance to some rich asshole who wanted a decorated veteran as a conversation piece? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Probably burn down their house. Exactly. Ember settled back onto her makeshift nest, but her posture was less hostile now. So why should you be any different? What makes you think you can understand what I'm going through? Because I don't want to own you, Marcus said simply. Hell, I can barely take care of myself most days. I'm living in a one-bedroom apartment with a broken air conditioner, surviving on disability checks and whatever odd jobs I can find. The last thing I need is a dragon. Then why are you here? Marcus thought about the question seriously. Because maybe what you need isn't another owner. Maybe you need a fellow soldier who understands that grief isn't something to get over. It's something to carry forward. Maybe you need someone who won't try to replace what you lost, but will respect what it meant. Ember was quiet for several minutes. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost most of its edge. You know what the worst part is? They keep calling him His Majesty and talking about his royal legacy, but that's not who he was in the air. In combat, he was just Thalaxer, my pilot, my partner. He used to joke that I was the real brains of the operation. What was he like? Really like, not the political version. Stubborn as hell, Ember said, and for the first time, there was warmth in her voice. Refused to back down from a fight even when common sense said to retreat. Had this habit of humming old war songs during long flights. Always made sure the ground troops got medical attention before we did. Even when I was bleeding hydraulic fluid from a dozen holes, Marcus nodded. Rodriguez was like that. Always put his people first. Used to say that leadership wasn't about giving orders. It was about making sure everyone else made it home. Exactly. Ember's eyes brightened. These idiots with their inheritance ceremonies don't understand that. They think losing a king means the kingdom needs a new dragon to parade around. They don't get that I lost my best friend. The four-armed alien cleared his throat nervously. If I may interrupt, the embassy needs to know if this arrangement will be peaceful. We have insurance claims to file. Ember looked at Marcus, then at the aliens, then back at Marcus. Tell you what, Sergeant. I've got a proposition. You stick around for a week. Not as my owner or companion or whatever sanitized bullshit they're calling it. Just as someone who gets it. Help me finish what I'm writing here, and maybe we can figure out what comes next. What exactly are you writing? Thalaxer's real war record? Every battle, every soldier saved, every decision that mattered. The official histories make him sound like some noble figurehead. I want people to know he was a warrior who bled for his beliefs. She gestured with one massive claw to the organized chaos around them. I've got 3 centuries of memories to sort through. Could use someone with a military mind to help me get the tactics right? Marcus looked around the room again, seeing it now not as destruction but as a workshop. A place where someone was building something important from the ashes of their grief. All right, he said. 1 week. But I've got conditions. Ember's eyebrows, which were apparently spiky ridges above her eyes, rose in surprise. You're setting conditions for me? The diplomats here arrange for food and basic supplies. I'm not going hungry because you're mad at the universe. And you explain things as we go. I don't know alien military history. Anything else? Marcus grinned. Yeah, you teach me some of those creative threats you've been using. I might need them for my landlord. 3 days into their arrangement, Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor while Ember dictated battle accounts, her massive head hovering over holographic star charts that she manipulated with surprising delicacy. The embassy had provided him with a military-grade tablet and translation software, though Ember insisted on speaking English whenever possible. Now this is where it gets interesting, she said, highlighting a sector near the galactic rim. The Hive had overrun 3 Centauran colonies and were using captured civilians as living shields around their orbital platforms. Standard Imperial Navy doctrine said to pull back and wait for reinforcements. But Talaxer didn't follow doctrine, Marcus said. Already seeing where this was going, damn right he didn't. He spent 2 days studying the platform's patrol patterns, then came up with the most insane rescue plan I've ever been part of. Ember's eyes gleamed with the memory. We went in at night, just him and me, flying so close to that gas giant's radiation belt that our instruments were screaming error warnings. Marcus typed rapidly, noting tactical details that the official histories had glossed over. How'd you extract the civilians without alerting the Hive? That's the beautiful part. Thalaxer realized the Hive were using their captives as biological computers, plugging them into their systems to process calculations. So, instead of trying to fight our way through their defenses, we hacked their own network using the prisoners as relay points. You turn their war crime into their weakness. Exactly. Ember rose to her full height, spreading her wings in excitement before remembering the ceiling and folding them back. Took us 18 hours, but we pulled out over 3,000 civilians. The Hive didn't even realize what was happening until their platform started losing computational power. Marcus paused in his typing. Over the past 3 days, he'd learned more about actual military strategy from Ember than from all his army training manuals combined. Her recall was perfect, her analysis sophisticated, and her understanding of tactics across dozens of species was encyclopedic. Why didn't you ever become a general yourself? Ember's expression darkened. Because I'm a dragon, not a civilized species. Most of the Confederation's military brass still think of my people as intelligent animals. Good for carrying cargo or providing air support, but not for strategic planning. Even after 3 centuries of proving them wrong? Especially then. Success makes them nervous. She gestured to the scattered remains of expensive furniture. You think they sent me rich inheritors because they respected my service record? They wanted me neutralized, turned into someone's trophy so I couldn't cause disruptions in the new administration? Marcus set down the tablet. What kind of disruptions? The kind where I point out that the new king's military advisors are incompetent, political appointees who couldn't fight their way out of a supply closet. Ember's tail lashed. Thalaxer's been gone a month, and they've already reversed half his strategic reforms. They're repositioning fleets based on trade concerns instead of actual threats. What threats? Ember called up a new star chart, this one showing recent military movements across multiple sectors. The Void Runners have been probing our border systems. Nothing major yet? Just testing response times, checking our patrol patterns? Classic pre-invasion reconnaissance. Marcus studied the data. Even with his limited knowledge of alien politics, the pattern was obvious. They're looking for weak spots, and they're finding them. The new administration pulled 3 patrol squadrons from the Rim worlds last week to escort a trade delegation. Left a gap in coverage big enough to fly a dreadnought through. You tried to warn them? 3 times. Got told I was overreacting due to grief and needed to. Except that military priorities had changed with the new leadership. Ember's voice dripped with disgust. Apparently, my 3 centuries of combat experience don't stack up against their 6 months of political theory. Marcus was beginning to understand why the embassy considered Ember a diplomatic emergency. She wasn't just a grieving dragon, she was a walking strategic database with the emotional regulation of someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. What would Talaxer have done? Kicked their asses until they remembered that dead civilians don't pay taxes. Ember studied the star charts with the intensity of a general planning a campaign. But Thalixer had authority. I'm just inherited property now. Maybe that's not entirely true. What do you mean? Marcus thought about his own struggles with the VA bureaucracy, with officers who'd never seen combat making decisions about benefits for soldiers, who'd given everything for their country. In the Army, we had a saying, there's the right way, the wrong way, and the Army way, but when lives were on the line, good soldiers found ways to do the right thing regardless of what the regulations said. You're suggesting insubordination? I'm suggesting that maybe a decorated veteran with a legitimate inheritance has certain rights that nobody's explained to her yet. Marcus pulled up the legal documents the diplomats had left. According to this, you're not just property. As Thalixer's companion, you're entitled to maintain his personal effects, access his strategic files, and continue any ongoing projects of military significance. Ember leaned closer, her massive head hovering over the tablet. Keep reading. Furthermore, the companion retains all security clearances and advisory positions held at the time of the king's death. Pending review by appropriate military authorities. Marcus looked up at her. When was the last time anyone reviewed your clearances? Never. They just assumed ... Ember's eyes widened as the implications hit her. Son of a bitch. I still have access to the strategic planning network. And as an advisor, you have the right to file official reports about threats to Confederation security. Reports that would go directly to the Joint Chiefs, bypassing the political appointees entirely. Ember was already moving toward a wall panel Marcus hadn't noticed before. They can ignore a grieving dragon's emotional outbursts, but they can't ignore official intelligence assessments from a cleared strategic advisor. The panel opened to reveal a sophisticated communications array. Ember's claws danced over controls with practiced ease, and within moments, holographic displays showed live feeds from border patrol units. Holy shit, she whispered. It's worse than I thought. Look at this. Marcus moved closer to the displays. Even with his limited understanding of alien military symbology, the situation was clear. Those aren't probe ships. No, those are forward scouts for a full battle fleet. Ember's voice was grim. The Void Runners aren't just testing our defenses, they're already moving invasion forces into position. And our reformed patrol routes won't detect them until they're 3 days out from populated systems. How long before the invasion fleet arrives? At current speed? Maybe a week, 2 at the outside? Ember was already opening communication channels to multiple destinations. I need to contact Admiral Kess, General Thrain, and the emergency response coordinators. If we move fast, we can still reposition our fleets to intercept them. Marcus watched her work, marveling at the transformation. The grieving dragon was gone, replaced by a seasoned military professional who moved with purpose and authority. What do you need me to do? Help me draft these reports so they're politically bulletproof. I need language that shows I'm operating within my authority, following proper channels, and basing everything on verifiable intelligence. Ember paused in her typing and looked at him seriously. You sure you want to get involved in this? If I'm wrong about my authority, we could both end up in serious trouble. Marcus thought about the thousands of civilians on those border worlds, about families who had no idea death was heading their way while politicians played power games. He thought about Rodriguez and the rest of his squad, who died because someone in a comfortable office had made a decision without understanding what was actually happening on the ground. Ma'am, he said, falling back into military formality. I didn't survive Afghanistan just to watch good people die because nobody wanted to listen to inconvenient intelligence reports. Ember's fierce grin showed every one of her impressive teeth. Outstanding, Sergeant. Let's go save some lives. The response to Ember's intelligence reports was swift and predictable. Within 6 hours, 3 different government officials had demanded her immediate surrender to proper authorities. 2 news networks had branded her a rogue element, and the embassy had received formal complaints from 5 different departments about unauthorized Military activities by inherited property. Marcus watched the feeds coming in on Ember's communication array while she systematically ignored every attempt to contact her directly. They're not even addressing the intelligence about the Void Runner fleet, just complaining that you filed reports without permission. Standard bureaucratic response, Ember said, not looking up from her analysis of enemy fleet movements. Shoot the messenger, ignore the message. Thalixer used to call it death by committee situations where taking action without proper authorization was illegal, but getting proper authorization was impossible. What's Admiral Kess's response? Smart woman. She's not acknowledging my reports officially, but look at this. Ember highlighted fleet movement orders on her tactical display. 3 heavy cruiser squadrons just got routine training exercise. Orders that happen to put them exactly where they need to be to intercept the Void Runner advance force. Marcus studied the troop movements. And General Thrain? Even better. He's conducting emergency readiness drills that evacuate civilian populations from the 3 most vulnerable border systems. Ember's tail swished with satisfaction. They can't publicly admit they're acting on intelligence from a rogue dragon, but they're still doing their jobs. So why do you look worried? Ember manipulated the star chart, zooming in on the approaching enemy fleet. Because the politicians know what's happening too. And rather than admit they were wrong, they're doubling down. Look, new orders appeared on the display, stamped with the highest levels of government authority. Admiral Kess and General Thrain were being recalled to the capital for consultations on unauthorized military activities. There. Replacements were political, appointees with no combat experience. They're pulling the competent commanders right before a major battle. Marcus stared at the orders in disbelief. That's insane. That's politics. They'd rather lose the border systems than admit a dragon knew something they didn't. Ember's claws scraped against the metal floor. The new commanders will probably order our fleets back to proper defensive positions, which means the Void Runners will hit undefended civilians. Marcus felt a familiar anger building, the same rage he'd experienced watching good soldiers die because of incompetent leadership. There has to be something we can do. Oh, there is, Ember said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. But it involves breaking about 30 different laws and probably committing treason. I'm listening. Ember turned to face him fully, her fiery eyes reflecting the star charts around them. Thalixer had contingency plans for situations exactly like this. Protocols for when the regular chain of command became compromised by politics or corruption. What kind of protocols? Emergency command authorization. In cases where immediate action was required to prevent catastrophic loss of civilian life, field commanders could invoke ancient military codes that bypassed normal authority structures. Ember pulled up a new display showing archaic legal text. The catch is that it required authorization from the king's strategic advisor, a position that technically ... that you still hold, Marcus finished. But if you authorize emergency action and you're wrong about your authority ... we both get executed for treason, yes. Ember's expression was grim. But if we do nothing, hundreds of thousands of civilians die while politicians argue about jurisdiction. Marcus thought about the families on those border worlds, about children who would never grow up if the Void Runners reached them. He thought about his own family back home and what he'd want someone to do if they were in danger while bureaucrats played games with their lives. What exactly would emergency authorization allow? Admiral Kess and General Thrain could ignore their recall orders and maintain command of their forces. They could engage the Void Runner fleet without waiting for official permission. And they could coordinate with independent military contractors who aren't bound by Confederation chain of command. Independent contractors? Ember's grin was wolfish. Mercenaries, pirates, anyone with ships and weapons who's willing to fight for pay rather than politics. The border systems have quite a few retired military officers who left service because they were tired of bureaucratic interference. Marcus understood immediately. You're talking about putting together an off-the-books fleet? Exactly. Officially, It would be Admiral Kess conducting training exercises while independent contractors happen to be in the same area. Unofficially, it would be a coordinated defense that could stop the Void Runners. Cold, and the legal authorization for all of. This comes from a dragon that most of the government considers to be inherited property, which is why it's either brilliant or suicidal, depending on whether I actually have the authority I think I do. Ember studied the approaching enemy fleet again. Decision time, Sergeant. In about 12 hours, those politicians are going to strip command from every competent officer in the border regions. After that, it won't matter what authorization we have. Marcus looked at the displays showing thousands of innocent lives hanging in the balance. Then at the dragon, who was probably the only one in position to save them. It reminded him of Afghanistan, of moments when the right choice was obvious even if the consequences were terrifying. How do we do it? First, I need to send coded messages to Kess and Thrain explaining the situation and giving them emergency authorization to maintain command. Then we contact every mercenary, privateer, and independent security contractor within jump range and offer them combat pay to join a training exercise. What about after? Even if we win, the government isn't going to forgive this. Ember was quiet for a moment. Thalexer used to say that sometimes the only way to serve your people was to become someone they could never officially acknowledge. A ghost in the machine, doing what needed to be done while everyone else maintained plausible deniability. You're talking about going underground, becoming an outlaw. I'm talking about becoming what I always was, a soldier who puts mission before career. Ember looked at him seriously. But you don't have to be part of this. You could leave now, claim you were held against your will. Your record is clean. Marcus thought about his apartment, his disability checks, his quiet life of trying to forget everything that had gone wrong. Then he thought about Rodriguez and the others who died believing their sacrifice mattered, believing they were protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Sergeant. Rodriguez used to say that integrity wasn't about following orders. It was about doing the right thing even when nobody was. Watching, Marcus moved to the communication array. What's the first message we need to send? Ember's expression softened with something that might have been gratitude. To Admiral Kess, tell her that strategic advisor Ember, acting under Emergency Protocol 77 Alpha, is authorizing her to maintain field command and engage hostile forces as she sees fit. Marcus began typing, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. And if we're wrong about your authority, then we'll die knowing we tried to save innocent lives instead of watching them die to protect our careers. Ember began opening channels to military contractors across 3 sectors. But I don't think we're wrong. Thalexer didn't choose me as his companion because I was safe or politically convenient. He chose me because, when push came to shove, I'd do whatever it took to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. Even if it meant becoming the enemy of your own government. Ember's claws danced over the controls, sending authorization codes that would either save the border worlds or condemn them both to execution for treason. Especially then, Sergeant. Especially then. The battle began 18 hours later, not in the vast emptiness between stars where fleet engagements usually took place, but in the crowded shipping lanes around New Centauria, where 3 million civilians had no time to evacuate. Marcus watched the tactical displays from Ember's command center, feeling helpless as ship icons moved across star charts in deadly patterns. Admiral Kess had maintained command despite her official recall, positioning her fleet to protect the civilian evacuation routes. General Thrain had declared martial law on 6 border worlds and was coordinating ground defenses. And scattered throughout the battle zone, independent contractors flew ships ranging from sleek military surplus fighters to converted cargo haulers bristling with improvised weapons. Void Runner Vanguard is engaging our forward screen, Ember reported, her claws manipulating multiple displays simultaneously. 17 enemy destroyers versus Admiral Kess's cruiser squadron and about 30 independent contractors. Those aren't good odds. No, but they're better than what we'd have had if the politicians had gotten their way. Ember highlighted friendly ship positions. Look at this, Captain Rodriguez commanding a converted mining ship called Revenge, Lieutenant Commander. Singh in a surplus fighter squadron, Colonel Patel leading a wing of freight security vessels. Every one of them is a veteran who left regular service because they were tired of bureaucratic interference. Marcus noted the familiar names, human officers, who'd apparently found the same thing in space that he'd experienced on Earth. They're not fighting for money, are they? Hell no. Most of them are working for free, just for the chance to serve under competent leadership again. Ember's voice carried fierce pride. This is what military professionalism looks like, when you strip away the politics, soldiers doing their jobs because lives depend on it. The display flashed with incoming priority signals. Admiral Kess's voice crackled through the speakers, calm despite the chaos around her. Strategic Command. This is Admiral Kess. Enemy main force is larger than anticipated. Estimate 47 capital ships plus escorts. Request immediate reinforcement and clarification of engagement parameters. Ember leaned toward the microphone. Admiral, this is Strategic Advisor Ember. You are authorized to engage with full force. Reinforcements are en route. Hold the line. Understood, Strategic Command. Initiating combat operations. Marcus watched ship icons begin moving in complex attack patterns. What reinforcements? I thought this was everyone we could get. It is for now. But remember, the Void Runners aren't just attacking the Confederation. They're threatening shipping lanes used by every major power in this sector. Ember's grin was predatory. I may have sent a few intelligence briefings to some very interesting recipients. Such as the Terran Federation Navy seems they have a significant merchant fleet in this area that might be threatened by Void Runner expansion. Also the Free Traders Union, the Centauran Defense Force, and a few independent human colonies that really don't like raiders. Marcus stared at her. You're bringing in everyone. I'm providing intelligence to parties with legitimate security interests. What they choose to do with that information is entirely up to them. The displays began showing new ship signatures jumping into the battle zone. And apparently they're choosing to conduct training exercises in the area. The tactical situation transformed as dozens of new contacts appeared. Sleek Terran destroyers, heavily armed Centaurian battle cruisers, and swarms of smaller vessels from various human colonies and trading organizations. The Void Runner fleet suddenly found themselves outnumbered 3-1. This is Admiral Chun Terran Federation Navy, a new voice announced. We're conducting joint training exercises in this sector. Any hostile forces interfering with legitimate commerce will be engaged. Colonel Martinez, Free Traders Union Security Force. Our convoy escorts are authorized to defend merchant shipping by any means necessary. Captain Okafor, representing several independent colonies. We're here to protect our people. Marcus realized what Ember had accomplished. By framing the defense as multiple separate actions by different organizations, she'd created a coalition that couldn't be disbanded by any single government. They can't order a recall if everyone's operating under different authorities. Exactly. And since the Void Runners fired first, everyone's acting in legitimate self-defense. Ember monitored the expanding battle with professional satisfaction. Best part is, most of these commanders know each other from previous conflicts. They're coordinating without needing official authorization. The tide of battle turned quickly. The Void Runner fleet, designed to overwhelm scattered defense forces, found themselves facing a coordinated response from experienced military professionals. Their advance force was destroyed within 2 hours, and their main fleet began a fighting retreat toward the border. Void Runner fleet is withdrawing, Admiral Kess reported. Estimate 70% casualties. They're running for the jump point. Let them go, Ember advised. We've made our point. But even as victory became clear, Marcus noticed new signals appearing on the communication array, official Confederation government transmissions with maximum priority stamps. Incoming orders from the capital, he warned Ember. They're demanding your immediate surrender for court-martial. Ember read the messages without emotion. Treason, inciting rebellion, unauthorized military action, impersonating a government official, and destruction of public property. That last one's for the furniture I burned. What do? We finish the job. Ember began transmitting final authorization codes to the fleet commanders. Admiral Kess, General Thrain, this is Strategic Advisor Ember. Emergency protocols are now terminated. Resume normal chain of command. And await further orders from your proper superiors. Understood, Strategic Command. Thank you for your service. The tactical displays showed the various military forces beginning to separate, each returning to their normal patrol areas or jumping out of the system entirely. Within an hour, the only evidence of the massive battle would be debris fields and the 3 million civilians who were still alive. That's it? Marcus asked. We just go back to being criminals. We go back to being what we always were, soldiers who did their jobs. Ember began shutting down the command systems methodically. The politicians will claim credit for the victory. The military will get new leadership that actually knows what they're doing. And the border worlds will remember that someone stood up for them when it mattered. And us? We disappear. Officially, none of this happened. I was never anything more than a grieving dragon who destroyed some furniture, and you were just a veteran who got caught up in my emotional breakdown. Marcus looked around the command center that had coordinated the defense of 3 star systems. What will you do now? Ember was quiet for a moment, studying the star charts one final time. There are other threats out there. Other situations where competent military advice might be useful, even if it has to come from unofficial sources. You're talking about becoming a military consultant for hire. I'm talking about being what Thalexer trained me to be, someone who protects people regardless of what the politicians want. She looked at him seriously. Question is, what will you do? You could go back to your apartment, collect a commendation for being involved in a successful military operation, maybe even get a job with the embassy. Marcus thought about his quiet life, his disability checks, his carefully maintained routine of trying not to remember Afghanistan. Then he thought about the past week, about feeling useful again, about being part of something that actually mattered. Or I could help a strategic advisor set up consulting operations. Seems like you'll need someone who understands human military thinking and bureaucratic procedures. Ember's fierce grin returned. It would be dangerous work. Unofficial, probably. Illegal half the time, definitely not covered by any government benefits package. But it would be the right work. Yeah, Ember said, beginning to pack the most important equipment into portable cases. It would be the right work. As they prepared to leave the embassy and disappear into the galaxy, Marcus realized that for the first time since Afghanistan, he felt like a soldier again. Not just a broken veteran trying to survive, but someone with a mission that mattered, Rodriguez would have approved. 6 months later, Marcus sat in the co-pilot seat of a modified cargo ship called Reasonable Doubt, as they approached a space station orbiting a disputed asteroid mining facility. The ship's exterior looked like any other commercial freighter, but hidden beneath cargo panels were military-grade sensors, communication equipment, and enough firepower to level a small city. Remind me again why we're taking this job, he said, reviewing intelligence reports on his tablet. The local government specifically requested that we stay away from their territorial dispute. Because the local government is run by idiots who think they can negotiate with the Bloodfang Syndicate, Ember replied from the pilot's seat. Her massive form had taken some getting used to in the ship's cramped cockpit, but she flew with the skill of someone who'd been doing it for centuries. And because 300,000 miners and their families are about to become hostages in a corporate war, their consulting business had grown rapidly through word of mouth among military professionals who were frustrated with political interference. They specialized in situations where official intervention was impossible but competent military action was desperately needed. Sometimes they provided intelligence analysis, sometimes strategic planning, and sometimes direct action when no one else was willing or able to step up. Status report on local forces? Ember asked. Marcus consulted his files. The mining consortium has 12 security ships, all lightly armed patrol craft. The colonial government has a militia squadron, 18 fighters, and 2 corvettes. The Bloodfang Syndicate is bringing 47 ships, including 6 heavy cruisers, and official response? The Confederation Navy says it's outside their jurisdiction. The Terran Federation is monitoring the situation with concern. The local sector government is calling for all parties to exercise restraint and pursue diplomatic solutions, which translates to, we're going to let the pirates massacre civilians rather than risk political complications, Ember said with disgust. Good thing we don't work for politicians anymore. Their ship's communication array crackled with an incoming transmission. Unknown freighter, this is Station Commander Wells. You're entering restricted space. State your business or prepare to be boarded. Ember activated the communication system. Station Commander. This is Captain Ember of the consulting ship Reasonable Doubt. We're here to provide military assessment services to any parties interested in preventing unnecessary civilian casualties. Consulting services? Listen, lady, we've got a fleet of pirates bearing down on us and no time for corporate consultants. Unless you've got military-grade weapons and trained crews, you need to clear out of here before shooting starts. As it happens, Commander, we do have access to military assets. Question is, are you interested in effective resistance, or would you prefer to surrender and hope the Syndicate shows mercy to civilians? There was a long pause. Who the hell are you people? Marcus leaned toward the microphone. Commander, this is Sergeant Marcus Thompson, United States Army retired. My partner and I specialize in providing military coordination services in situations where official help isn't available. We've successfully organized defensive operations in 17 similar scenarios. 17? How have I never heard of you? Because we work very hard to stay unofficial, Ember said. Our clients don't hire us for publicity. They hire us to solve problems that can't be solved through normal channels. Another pause, then. What kind of military assets are we talking about? Marcus smiled, knowing they'd hooked him. Well, Commander, it's interesting how many independent contractors happen to be working in this sector. Freight security, convoy escorts, private survey teams with well-armed ships. Amazing how quickly they can respond to emergency situations when properly coordinated. You're talking about mercenaries. We prefer independent security professionals, Ember said. And before you ask about authorization, the mining consortium has every right to hire security contractors to protect their facilities. The colonial government can request assistance from any available source, and civilian evacuation is always a legitimate humanitarian operation. Over the next 6 hours, they watched their proven formula work again. Marcus coordinated with local authorities while Ember sent coded messages to military contractors throughout the system. Admiral Kess, now officially retired but commanding a freight security company, arrived with a squadron of former Confederation Navy ships. Captain Rodriguez, apparently. Marcus wasn't the only one who'd found new purpose in the outer systems. Brought his converted mining vessel and 3 other industrial security ships. Dozens of other vessels responded to Ember's calls, each operating under legitimate but loosely defined contracts. When the Bloodfang Syndicate arrived expecting easy prey, they found a coordinated defense force that outnumbered them 2 to 1 and was commanded by experienced military professionals who had no patience for pirate tactics. The battle lasted 3 hours and ended with the complete destruction or surrender of the Syndicate fleet. Not a single civilian was harmed, and the mining operation continued without interruption. Outstanding work, people, Ember transmitted to the assembled fleet. Contracts fulfilled, objectives achieved. Thanks for the professional service. As the various ships dispersed to their normal activities, Station Commander Wells sent a private message to their ship. I don't know who you really are, but thank you. My daughter lives on this station. You saved her life today. It's just doing our jobs, Commander, Marcus replied. Stay safe out there. Later, as they jumped out of the system, Marcus reviewed their operational reports. 17 successful operations in 6 months. We're getting pretty good at this. We're getting better at working together, Ember corrected. You handle the human military mindset and bureaucratic navigation. I provide strategic analysis and coordination with non-human forces. It's a good partnership. Any regrets about leaving the official world behind? Ember considered the question while piloting them toward their next destination, a system where corporate security forces were reportedly abusing civilian populations. You know what Thalexer used to say? The uniform doesn't make the soldier. The soldier makes the uniform worth wearing. We're still soldiers, just without the uniforms. Exactly. And without the politicians, the bureaucrats, the committees, and the budget meetings? We identify threats, develop solutions, implement them effectively, and move on to the next problem. Ember's voice carried deep satisfaction. It's what we were always meant to do. Marcus looked out at the stars ahead of them, thinking about all the places where good people needed help that wouldn't come through official channels. What's our next job? Colony world called Haven's Rest. The local corporate governor is using military contractors to suppress labor organizers. Turns out some of those contractors are using equipment and tactics that violate several interstellar treaties. Let me guess the official response is to monitor the situation and encourage all parties to pursue peaceful resolution. You're learning, Ember said with a grin. But it turns out that several independent human rights organizations are very interested in hiring security consultants to document treaty violations. And certain retired military officers are available for humanitarian assessment missions. Marcus began pulling up files on Haven's Rest, already thinking about logistics and coordination. It felt good to have a mission again, to be part of something that mattered beyond his own survival. Think we'll ever get to retire? He asked. Probably not, Ember admitted. There's always going to be another situation where competent people need to step up because the official systems are failing. Good, Marcus said, and realized he meant it. Rodriguez always said that some missions never end. They just find new people to carry them forward. As their ship jumped into hyperspace toward their next operation, Marcus thought about the letter he'd send to his family. Not about the battles or the danger, but about finding his place again. About being useful, about serving something larger than himself. He wouldn't mention that his partner was a dragon who spoke like a drill sergeant and could coordinate military operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. Some things were too complicated to explain in a letter, but he would tell them that he'd found his purpose again. Working with someone who understood that sometimes the most important service happened in the shadows, performed by people who would never get official recognition but who did the work anyway because it needed to be done. The inheritance had turned out to be exactly what both of them needed, not ownership, but partnership. Not a master and a servant, but two soldiers who had found their way back to the war that mattered. Rodriguez would definitely have approved.